I always thought Clara was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by stepping into it. Her laugh was like a melody. Her eyes a deep hazel that seemed to hold secrets I'd spend a lifetime unraveling. We'd been married for 8 years, built a home in the quiet suburbs of Portland, and filled it with memories. Photos of our trips to the coast, her gardening tools scattered in the shed, my old guitar I swore I'd learn to play someday. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I worked long hours as a structural engineer, designing bridges that connected places and people, while Clara ran a small bakery downtown, her hands always dusted with flour when she came home. We were a team, or so I believed. It started with small things I didn't notice at first. She'd linger in the shower longer than usual, her phone buzzing more often on the counter, her smile tightening when I asked about her day. I chalked it up to stress. Her bakery had been struggling with rising costs, and I'd been distracted with a big project at work. But then came the night that cracked everything open. I'd come home early, a rare treat, carrying a bottle of her favorite wine to surprise her. The house was dark, her car gone. Odd. Since she'd texted me she was staying in to catch up on paperwork. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. Unease settled into my gut like a stone. Hours passed. I sat on the couch, the wine unopened, my mind spinning through possibilities. Car trouble, a late delivery at the bakery, an emergency with her sister. At midnight, headlights swept across the living room window. She stumbled in, her hair mussed, her blouse buttoned unevenly. "Where've you been?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze, then laughed. A high, brittle sound. "Oh, just out with a friend." Lost track of time. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. I wanted to believe her, but something in the air felt wrong, like the moment before a bridge buckles under too much weight. The next day, I couldn't shake it. I went through her phone while she slept, something I'd never done before. There were messages from Tom, a name I didn't recognize. "Last night was wild," one said. "Can't wait to see you again," another. My chest tightened as I scrolled, each word a hammer against the life I thought we had. Tom. Who was Tom? I didn't confront her then. I needed proof, something solid to hold on to before I let the world I'd built collapse. I became a man obsessed. Work suffered. Blueprints blurred into meaningless lines as I fixated on Clara and this Tom. I dug deeper. Her phone had a lock now, but I remembered her laptop password from years ago, our anniversary. It still worked. Her email was a goldmine. Reservations for dinners I'd never eaten, hotel bookings in towns I'd never visited. One email from Tom stood out, a photo attachment. I clicked it, my stomach lurching. Clara, laughing in a dimly lit bar, her hand on a man's arm. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a grin that made me want to smash the screen. Tom, I assumed. I cross-referenced the dates. Every time she'd said she was working late or visiting her mom, there was a corresponding message or receipt. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was meticulous, planned. She'd woven a tapestry of lies, and I'd been too blind to see the threads. But the real twist came when I recognized the bar in the photo. It was O'Malley's, a dive near my office where my coworker Dave liked to drink. Dave, who'd been acting strange lately, avoiding me at lunch, mentioning Clara's bakery more than once in passing. A sick suspicion took root. I drove to O'Malley's that night, parking across the street. Sure enough, there she was, slipping out of Tom's car. A beat-up Jeep I'd seen in Dave's driveway once. But Tom wasn't Dave. He was someone else entirely. Clara kissed him, long and slow, before heading inside. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Dave wasn't the lover, but he knew something. I was sure of it. I followed them in, keeping my distance. The bar was loud, smoky, a perfect cover. Clara and Tom sat in a corner booth, her leg brushing his under the table. I ordered a beer I didn't drink and watched. Then Dave walked in. My heart stopped. He slid into the booth beside them, laughing like they were old friends. Clara leaned into Tom, but Dave's eyes darted around, nervous, guilty. He knew I might show up. He was part of this, somehow. The pieces didn't fit yet, but I felt the shape of it. Clara wasn't just with Tom. There was a network, a web of deceit, and Dave was a thread I could pull. I left before they saw me, my mind racing with plans. Not just to confront, but to destroy. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. Her cookbooks on the shelf, our wedding photo on the mantel, all mocking me. I pored over the evidence I'd collected. Emails, photos, dates. Tom was Thomas Rourke, a contractor who'd done renovations on Clara's bakery last year. LinkedIn confirmed it. He'd posted about the job, even tagged her in a photo. Charming, rugged, the kind of guy who'd charm his way into any room. Dave, though, was trickier. He wasn't in the messages, but his presence at O'Malley's tied him in. I needed more. I called in sick the next day and tailed Clara. She left for the bakery at 8, but instead of turning downtown, she drove to a motel off the highway. Tom's Jeep was already there. I parked far enough away to watch without being seen. They disappeared into room 12, her arm around his waist. I waited an hour, then approached the desk clerk with a sob story about a lost wallet and a $20 bill. He gave me Tom's registration. Thomas Rourke, paid in cash, no checkout date. Clara emerged later, her lipstick smudged, and drove off. I didn't follow. I had what I needed. Back home, I dug into Dave. His social media was sparse, but a mutual friend mentioned he'd been bragging about a side gig, something vague about consulting. I hacked into his work email. His password was his dog's name, Pathetic, and found invoices from Clara's bakery, payments for marketing advice, totaling thousands, dated after her supposed late nights. Dave wasn't just a witness, he was profiting. She'd funneled money, our money, through him to cover her tracks. The betrayal deepened, a blade twisting in my gut. I started planning. Confronting her would be too easy, too quick. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to lose everything she valued, her bakery, her reputation, her precious Tom. And Dave? He'd pay too. I spent days researching, sketching out a revenge that wasn't impulsive but surgical, a collapse engineered with the precision I brought to my bridges. The first step was gathering more leverage. I needed Tom's weaknesses, Dave's secrets, and Clara's breaking point. Tom was the key to unraveling Clara's world, so I turned my focus to him. A deep dive online revealed more than I expected. He wasn't just a contractor, he had a record. Public records showed a DUI 2 years back, a bar fight that landed him probation. His business was a mess too. Reviews complained of shoddy work, unpaid suppliers. Clara had picked a winner. I wondered what she saw in him, beyond the rugged charm. Maybe it was the thrill, the escape from our steady life. Whatever it was, I'd use it against him. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled guy named Paul who didn't ask too many questions. I gave him Tom's name, the motel, the Jeep's plates. 2 days later, he called me with dirt. Tom was married. His wife, Lisa, lived an hour away in Salem, oblivious to his double life. Paul had photos, Tom and Clara at the motel, Tom kissing her in his Jeep. There was more. Tom was skimming cash from Clara's bakery, pocketing payments meant for supplies. She either didn't know or didn't care. Either way, it was ammunition. I met Lisa under a pretense. I found her address from Paul's report, drove to Salem, and knocked on her door with a fake story about a contracting job gone wrong. She was tired-looking, a toddler clinging to her leg, but she invited me in. Over coffee, I steered the conversation to Tom. Her face darkened. "He's always working late," she said, bitterness in her voice. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. I planted seeds. "I've seen him around Portland a lot, with a woman. Thought you should know." She went quiet, her hands trembling around her mug. I left her my number, knowing she'd dig. Meanwhile, I watched Dave. He was sloppy, met Tom at O'Malley's again, passing an envelope under the table. I snapped photos from my car, the zoom lens catching the exchange. Later, I followed him to a strip mall where he deposited cash at an ATM. Clara's money, I bet. My plan crystallized. I'd turn Tom's wife against him, expose Dave's greed, and let Clara watch it all crumble. But I needed one more piece, her reaction when the mask slipped. The next week was a blur of preparation. I kept up appearances at home, cooking dinner with Clara, asking about her day like nothing was wrong. She'd ramble about the bakery, her voice bright but hollow. I nodded, smiled, all while plotting. Paul sent me a goldmine. Audio from a bug he'd planted in Tom's Jeep. Clara's voice, clear as day, laughing about me. "He's so clueless, Tom. Thinks I'm at book club." Tom chuckled, saying, "Good thing he's not the jealous type." The casual cruelty of it fueled me. They thought I was a fool. They'd see. I started with Lisa. I mailed her an anonymous package, photos of Tom and Clara. A note saying, "He's lying to you. Check his accounts." I knew she'd confront him. Paul said she'd already hired her own PI. Next, I targeted Dave. I sent an email from a burner account to his boss, attaching the photos of him with Tom and the invoices. "Your employee's double-dipping," I wrote. "Ask him about Clara's bakery." Dave would squirm, maybe even crack under pressure. Clara was trickier. I wanted her to feel the loss before she knew I'd orchestrated it. I drained our joint savings, years of my salary, moving it to an offshore account she couldn't touch. Then I called her biggest supplier, posing as her assistant, and canceled all future orders, citing financial difficulties. The bakery would falter without dough or sugar. She'd notice soon, but not soon enough. Friday night, I set the stage. Clara said she was meeting a friend. I knew where she'd be, the motel. I waited until she left, then drove to O'Malley's. Tom was there, alone, nursing a beer. I slid into the booth across from him, my face calm. "You don't know me," I said. "But I know you. And Clara." His eyes widened, then narrowed. "What do you want?" he growled. I smiled. "Nothing yet. Just wanted to see the man who thinks he's smarter than me." I left him there, rattled. The real blow was coming, and he'd never see it. Tom's reaction at O'Malley's was just the beginning. A flicker of fear in his eyes that told me he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. I drove home that night with a strange calm settling over me, the kind that comes when you've committed to a course and there's no turning back. Clara wasn't there, of course. She'd be tangled up with him at the motel, oblivious to the storm I was brewing. I poured myself a whiskey and sat in the dark, replaying every moment of the last 8 years, searching for the cracks I'd missed. They were there, I realized, hidden in her late nights, her sudden interest in new friends, her laughter that had started to sound rehearsed. The next morning, I checked in with Paul. Lisa had taken the bait. She'd called Tom, screaming, according to a neighbor Paul had charmed. She'd found withdrawals from their joint account, money Tom had siphoned from Clara's bakery. Lisa wasn't just angry. She was vengeful. She'd already contacted a lawyer, and Paul said she was digging into Tom's past, unearthing every skeleton he'd buried. I smiled at that. Let her dismantle him from the inside. I'd handle the rest. Dave was cracking too. His boss had called him in after my anonymous tip, and Paul's contact at the firm said Dave was sweating through excuses, claiming the invoices were misunderstandings. But the photos I'd sent, of him passing cash with Tom, were harder to explain. He'd been suspended pending an investigation. I imagined him pacing his cramped apartment, wondering who'd turned on him. He'd figure it out eventually, but by then, it'd be too late. Clara came home that afternoon, her face tight with something she didn't share. "Rough day at the bakery," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. I nodded, playing the dutiful husband, while inside I marveled at how blind she was to the noose tightening around her. The supplier cancellation hadn't hit yet. She'd find out Monday when the shelves stayed empty. I'd already started phase 2, her reputation. I'd been posting on local forums from fake accounts, subtle at first, complaints about stale bread, rude service at her bakery. Soon I'd escalate. She'd built her life around that place. I'd make it a ruin. Monday morning, I watched Clara unravel. She left for the bakery early, but she was back by noon, her hands trembling as she poured coffee. "The supplier didn't deliver," she said, her voice thin. "They said I canceled everything. It's a mess. I don't know what happened." I feigned concern, asking questions I already knew the answers to, watching her squirm. She called the supplier, pacing the kitchen, her tone rising as they insisted they had her assistant's email on file. I don't have an assistant, she snapped, slamming the phone down. I sipped my coffee, hiding my satisfaction. She'd figure it out eventually, but not before the damage was done. Tom called her that afternoon. I saw his name flash on her screen before she snatched it up and stepped outside. I couldn't hear much, but her posture was tense, her free hand clenched into a fist. Trouble in paradise, I guessed. Lisa must have hit him hard. Good. I'd mailed her more photos that morning. Ones Paul had snapped of Tom and Clara in compromising moments. Nothing explicit, just enough to twist the knife. Let her rage fuel the fire I'd started. Dave showed up at our house that evening, unannounced. Clara was out, probably with Tom again, so I let him in, curious to see how deep he'd dig his hole. He looked wrecked, bags under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled. I'm in trouble at work, he said, voice shaking. Someone's framing me. Those payments from Clara, they're legit, I swear. I leaned back, studying him. Why would someone frame you? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He stammered, mentioning the bakery, Tom, but never quite meeting my gaze. He knew I suspected something. I let him ramble, then showed him out with a pat on the shoulder. Hope it works out, I said, knowing it wouldn't. That night, I escalated the online campaign. Using a VPN and burner accounts, I posted reviews claiming Clara's bakery used expired ingredients that she'd snapped at customers. I uploaded blurry photos, staged shots of stale pastries I'd bought and let sit out. Local Facebook groups lit up with chatter. Her regulars, the ones she bragged about, started questioning her. I watched the comments roll in, each one a brick pulled from the foundation of her world. She'd notice soon. Her phone was already buzzing with notifications she ignored. By Tuesday, Clara was a ghost of herself. She barely spoke, her eyes red from lack of sleep or tears. I didn't care which. The bakery was in chaos. No supplies, customers trickling away. Her staff asking questions she couldn't answer. She tried calling Tom, but he didn't pick up. I knew why. Lisa had filed for divorce, Paul told me, and she'd frozen their accounts. Tom was scrambling, probably begging Clara for cash now that his own well had dried up. I almost pitied him. Almost. I met Paul for coffee that afternoon, away from prying eyes. He handed me a USB drive. More audio from Tom's Jeep. I listened later, alone in my car. Clara's voice was frantic. Lisa knows everything, Tom. She's got pictures. How did this happen? Tom snapped back. I don't know, but you need to fix this. I need money, Clara, now. She hesitated, then promised to figure something out. I grinned. She'd try the joint account soon and find it empty. Checkmate. Dave called me that night, drunk and desperate. I think it's Tom, he slurred. He's setting me up. Those payments, he made me do it. I let him ramble, recording every word. He admitted to taking a cut, funneling cash to Tom under Clara's nose. She didn't know, he insisted, but I doubted that. Either way, it was gold, proof I could use later. I hung up, promising to help, knowing I'd bury him with it instead. Clara came home late, reeking of cheap motel soap. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. I'm going to bed, she mumbled, brushing past me. I waited until she was asleep, then slipped into her office. Her laptop was open, emails to her landlord, begging for an extension on rent. The bakery was bleeding money, and she was drowning. I added fuel to the fire, sending an anonymous tip to the health department about unsanitary conditions. They'd inspect soon, and with her luck, they'd find something, anything, to shut her down. Wednesday was the tipping point. Clara left early, frantic to salvage the bakery, but she didn't know the health inspector was already en route. I'd paid a kid from the neighborhood to scatter crumbs and leave a few empty cans near her dumpster. Nothing blatant, just enough to raise eyebrows. Paul confirmed it later. The inspector cited her for violations, gave her a week to fix it or face closure. She called me from the shop, sobbing. Everything's falling apart, she said. I don't know what to do. I murmured sympathies, offering to help, all while knowing I'd lit the match. Tom was spiraling too. Lisa's lawyer had served him papers, and Paul caught him arguing with Clara outside the motel. Her yelling about money, him storming off in his Jeep. I drained our savings just in time. She had nothing to give him. I pictured her pleading, him realizing she was a sinking ship. Perfect. I sent Lisa one last package. The Jeep audio timestamped with Clara begging Tom to leave his wife. Let her hear the desperation in her rival's voice. Dave was next. I leaked his confession to his boss, anonymously of course, along with the photos. By noon, Paul said Dave had been fired, escorted out in front of everyone. He'd called Clara after, leaving a voicemail I intercepted. You screwed me, Clara. Tom screwed me. I'm done. I deleted it before she heard it. Let her wonder where her allies went. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table, staring at bills she couldn't pay. I cooked dinner, her favorite pasta, acting the part of the supportive husband. We'll figure it out, I said, sliding a plate in front of her. She barely ate, her hands shaking. I watched her crumble piece by piece and felt the first real surge of triumph. The bakery was dying. Tom was abandoning her. Dave was gone. But I wasn't done. The final blow would be personal, public, and permanent. Thursday morning, Clara didn't go to the bakery. She stayed in bed, curtains drawn, a shadow of the woman I'd married. I left for work, but really, I drove to a print shop downtown. I'd spent the night compiling everything, Paul's photos, the emails, the audio transcripts, into a dossier. I had it printed in bold, glossy color, dozens of copies. The cover read, Clara's Secrets, a tale of trust and triumph. Ironic, sure, but it'd get attention. I mailed them to her suppliers, her staff, her regulars, everyone who'd propped up her little empire. Let them see who she really was. Tom showed up at our house that afternoon. I saw it on the security camera I'd installed weeks ago. He banged on the door, shouting her name, but she didn't answer. He looked desperate, unshaven, his Jeep parked crookedly in the driveway. I watched the footage later, savoring his panic. Lisa had taken everything, his house, his savings, and Clara was his last lifeline. Too bad she was broke and broken. He left after 10 minutes, peeling out like a man on the run. The online campaign hit its peak. The forums were buzzing, people claiming they'd gotten sick from her pastries, others saying she'd yelled at them over petty complaints. Her bakery's Yelp page tanked, 1-star reviews piling up. I'd hired a few freelancers to amplify it, posting from different IPs. By evening, a local news blog picked it up. Portland bakery faces backlash over quality, owner's behavior. Clara's phone lit up with texts. She ignored them, curled up on the couch, staring at nothing. I came home with takeout, playing the doting husband. Rough day, I asked, setting the bags down. She nodded, barely audible. It's all gone wrong, she whispered. The bakery, Tom, everything. I sat beside her, close enough to feel her tremble. Tom, I said, feigning ignorance. She flinched, then lied. Just a friend. He's helping. I nodded, letting her dig the hole deeper. Tomorrow she'd see the dossiers. Tomorrow she'd know I wasn't the fool she thought. Friday dawned gray and heavy, a fitting backdrop for the endgame. Clara dragged herself out of bed, her face pale, her movements slow, like she was wading through mud. I brewed coffee, handed her a mug, and watched her sip it absently. She didn't know the mail had already arrived at her bakery. Those glossy dossiers spilling her secrets to everyone who mattered. I timed it perfectly. Her staff would open them first, then the dominoes would fall. I kissed her forehead before leaving, a gesture so routine she didn't flinch, and drove off to watch it unfold from a distance. Paul met me near the bakery with binoculars and a thermos of coffee. We parked 2 blocks away, hidden by a row of trees. At 9 sharp, her assistant manager, Jen, arrived. She unlocked the door, grabbed the mail, and froze. Even from here, I could see her flip through the dossier, her jaw dropping. She called someone, probably Clara, then rushed inside. Minutes later, 2 other employees showed up, and the chaos began. They huddled, pointing at pages, their voices carrying faintly through the cracked window. Jen stormed out, tossing her apron in the dumpster. The others followed. Clara's crew was abandoning ship. Clara's car screeched into the lot an hour later. She burst into the bakery, clutching her phone, then emerged minutes later, tears streaming down her face. She'd seen it, the photos, the emails, the proof of her lies. She dialed someone. Tom, I guessed, but slumped against the wall when it went unanswered. I imagined her world collapsing. No staff, no supplies, no lover to lean on. Paul chuckled beside me. "You're a cold one," he said. I didn't reply. Cold, maybe, but she'd earned every shiver. That afternoon, the news blog updated. Bakery staff quit amid owner's scandal. The online chatter exploded. Customers vowing to boycott. Neighbors gossiping about that woman and her contractor. Clara came home early, silent, and locked herself in the bedroom. I knocked, offering dinner, but she didn't respond. Fine, let her stew. The real finale was tomorrow, when the last threads of her life would snap. Saturday morning, I woke to Clara's sobbing. She was in the kitchen, surrounded by crumpled tissues, her laptop open to the news blog. "They're all gone," she choked out when I walked in. "Jen, the staff, the customers, everyone hates me." I sat across from her, stirring my coffee, letting her words hang. "What happened?" I asked, voice steady. She hesitated, then lied again. "Someone's spreading rumors. It's not true." I nodded, sipping slowly, savoring the moment. She still thought she could salvage this, that I was too dense to see through her. The doorbell rang mid-morning. It was a courier with a thick envelope, court papers. I'd hired a lawyer weeks ago, quietly filing for divorce and claiming infidelity. Clara tore it open, her hands shaking, and gasped. "You're leaving me?" she whispered, eyes wide. "Why?" I leaned back, calm as stone. "I know about Tom," I said, "and Dave, and the money you funneled. I've known for weeks." Her face crumpled, a mix of shock and guilt, but I didn't stop. "You thought I was blind, Clara. I wasn't." She stammered, excuses tumbling out. "Tom was a mistake. Dave pressured her. She never meant to hurt me." I let her talk, her voice breaking, until she ran out of breath. Then I stood, tossing a copy of the dossier on the table. "Read it," I said. "It's everything, your lies, your meetings, your little games. Everyone else has." She flipped through it, sobbing harder with each page, but I didn't soften. "You built this mess," I told her. "Now live in it." I left her there, driving to the bank to finalize the last piece. The house was in my name, premarital property, and I'd listed it for sale that morning, cash only, below market value. It'd be gone in days, and she'd have nowhere to hide. Tom wouldn't take her in. Lisa had him cornered. Dave was a pariah. Clara's kingdom was ash, and I'd struck the match. Tomorrow I'd tighten the noose one last time. Sunday, I woke early and packed a suitcase. Not much, just essentials. Clara was still in bed, a lump under the covers, defeated. I didn't wake her. The realtor called at 8. The house had an offer already, full cash, closing in a week. I accepted, signing digitally from my car. Clara would get the eviction notice soon. Her name wasn't on the deed, and Oregon law favored me. She'd be out, scrambling for a lifeline that didn't exist. I drove to Salem next, to Lisa's place. She'd asked to meet after my last package, curious about the man who'd tipped her off. I told her everything over coffee, Clara's affair, the bakery money, my revenge. She listened, her face hard but grateful. "Tom's gone," she said. "Left town yesterday. I've got the house, the kid, everything." I handed her the Jeep audio, the final nail in his coffin if he ever fought back. She thanked me, a rare ally in this wreckage. Back in Portland, I stopped by Dave's apartment. He answered the door, bleary-eyed, reeking of stale beer. "You?" he croaked, stepping back. I didn't enter, just handed him a USB drive with his confession, the one I'd recorded. "Your boss has it," I said. "So does the IRS. Those payments, tax fraud. Enjoy the audit." His mouth opened, but no words came. I walked away, leaving him to drown in his own mess. He'd been complicit, a leech on my marriage, and now he'd pay. Clara called me that afternoon, begging. "Please don't do this," she sobbed. "I'll fix it. I'll leave Tom. I'll sell the bakery, anything." Too late. I hung up, blocking her number. The dossiers had reached her family by then. Her sister texted me, furious but sympathetic, saying Clara was a disgrace. Her parents wouldn't take her in. They were old school, unforgiving. She was alone just as I'd planned. Monday, the end came swift and sharp. Clara woke to the realtor's sign in the yard. Sold. And a locksmith changing the locks. I'd arranged it all, ensuring she couldn't get back in once she left. She pounded on the door, screaming my name, but I wasn't there. I watched from a cafe downtown, sipping espresso, the security feed on my phone. Neighbors gawked. Someone filmed it. By noon, it was on X. Woman loses it over house sale. Her humiliation was public now, a spectacle for strangers to dissect. The bakery shut down that day. The health violations, the staff walkout, the customer backlash, it was too much. Paul sent me a photo of the closed sign. The windows dark, her dream dead. I'd tipped off a creditor too. They'd seize her equipment by week's end to cover unpaid loans. She'd have nothing left to rebuild with, no legacy to cling to. Her phone must have been buzzing. Angry suppliers, confused friends. But she couldn't answer from a locked-out house with no charger. Tom surfaced briefly. Paul tracked him to a cheap motel on the outskirts. Alone, his Jeep repossessed by Lisa's lawyer. I sent him a text from a burner. "Clara's done. You're next." He didn't reply, probably too broke to keep his phone on. Lisa had stripped him bare, and I'd made sure Clara couldn't save him. Dave, meanwhile, got a visit from the IRS. According to a friend at his old firm, he'd be tied up in audits for years, penniless and disgraced. Clara's final call came via her sister's phone. I answered, curious. "You've ruined me," she whispered, voice raw. "Why?" I didn't hesitate. "You ruined us first," I said. "Every lie, every touch with him, every dollar you stole. I just returned the favor." She hung up and I deleted the call log. The bridge between us was gone, collapsed under the weight of her choices, and I'd engineered the fall. Tuesday, I left Portland for good. The house sale closed, the money wired to my offshore account. Enough to start over somewhere warm, far from her. I'd rented a condo in Costa Rica, a place with no extradition, just in case. Clara was a footnote now, a cautionary tale whispered in coffee shops. Paul sent me a last update. She'd moved into a friend's basement, jobless, her name mud in every circle she'd once ruled. The bakery was a shell, Tom a ghost, Dave a punching bag for tax collectors. I sat on my new balcony that night, the ocean breeze carrying salt and freedom. The revenge wasn't loud or messy. It was precise, a structure demolished beam by beam. She'd betrayed me in ways I'd never imagined, weaving her web with Tom and Dave, thinking I'd stay the clueless husband. I hadn't. I'd torn it all down, left her with nothing but the ashes of her own making. Looking back, I wondered if she'd ever suspected me. Not the late nights at work, not the calm I'd worn like armor. She'd underestimated me, saw a bridge builder where a saboteur stood. That was her mistake. I didn't feel joy exactly, more a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when a design holds true under pressure. She'd lost her home, her business, her lover, her pride. I'd lost a wife but gained something sharper. Control. The stars glittered over the water, indifferent to the wreckage I'd left behind. I raised a glass to them, to the life I'd reclaimed. Clara would rebuild, maybe, in time. Humans are stubborn that way. But it'd be on my terms, in a world I'd reshaped. She'd remember me not as the man she'd fooled, but the one who'd outplayed her. And that, I thought, was revenge enough.